Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Artistic Directors Julie Kent and Stanton Welch and Executive Director Jim Nelson, I would like to welcome you all to our first dance talk of the season. My name is Jasmine Fuller-Kane. I'm the Assistant Director of Development Communications and Publications. I'm so happy to be assisting with dance talks this season. Before I introduce our panel, I'd just like to give a friendly reminder to silence all cell phones and smartwatches. If you need to exit the theater at any time, please use the exits on the left and right. They're just behind the seats. So this evening, we'll be taking a deep dive into John Neumeier's A Midsummer Night's Dream, which kicks off our season next week on September 8th. Moderating our panel tonight is Dr. Elizabeth Klett. If you've been attending dance talks for a while, you may recognize Elizabeth as a moderator of some of our previous talks. Elizabeth is a professor of literature at University of Houston Clear Lake. She has a PhD and master's degree in English literature, a master's degree in Shakespeare studies from the Shakespeare Institute, and a bachelor's degree in English and theater. In 2019, she published her second book, Choreographing Shakespeare, Dance Adaptations of the Plays and Poems. Thank you for being here tonight, Elizabeth. Joining us on the panel is Melody Mennite, Houston Ballet principal dancer. Before joining Houston Ballet Academy at age 13, Melody trained at Santa Cruz Ballet Theater. Melody joined Houston Ballet as an apprentice in 2001, and she was promoted to principal in 2008. Melody reprises her role as Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream. We also have Houston Ballet first soloist Harper Watters joining us. Originally from Dover, New Hampshire, Harper Watters trained at Portsmouth School of Ballet and Walnut Hill School for the Performing Arts before joining Houston Ballet Academy in 2009. Harper was promoted to first soloist in 2021. Harper plays Philostrate / Puck, which we will get into that / tonight, in Midsummer. And finally, we have Corps De Ballet dancer Riley McMurray also joining us. Riley is originally from Chicago, Illinois, and trained at Faubourg School of Ballet before training in the Houston Ballet Academy in 2013. Riley joined the company as an apprentice in 2018 and was promoted to the Corps the following year. Riley plays Bottom, my personal favorite, in Midsummer. So please give a round of applause to our panel, and I'll let Elizabeth take it away.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be back here. It's been a few years for me, and I moderated the panel the first time Houston Ballet did this production, and I'm so excited to see it again next week. So we're going to be exploring the 3 different groups of characters that populate this ballet. And so that's why we've got 3 dancers here, 1 from each group, and they're going to be kind of giving us some insights into the nature of each of those groups of characters. I'm going to be giving you a synopsis up front, just so we are all on the same page, we know what's going on. There's a lot going on in this ballet. So A Midsummer Night's Dream takes place in Athens. And at the beginning, preparations are being made the night before Duke Theseus and Hippolyta's wedding. So you can see them up there on the left. Hippolyta is apprehensive about the upcoming wedding because she's seeing Theseus flirting with some of the women of the court. And Philostrate, on the right, the master of the revels, seems to resent her being there. And Harper plays Philostrate, so I'm actually going to ask you in a little bit just to talk about what's going on there. So the next kind of group on the next slide, later in Hippolyta's dreams, Hippolyta and Theseus become projections of the fairy king and queen, Titania and Oberon. And Philostrate becomes a projection of Puck, and so Harper plays Puck as well. And he is Oberon's servant. John Neumeier is using the doubling in these roles, which is something that he actually has borrowed from the theatrical tradition surrounding this play. And I think it really beautifully echoes the sort of double vision that's at work in the play, because Shakespeare's kind of juxtaposing, kind of opposing concepts in this play. So he's working with things like light versus dark, humor versus seriousness, day versus night, civilization versus wilderness, and then waking and sleeping. We've also got 4 young lovers in the play. They have a very complicated relationship. So Hermia and Lysander are in love with each other, but Hermia is also pursued by Demetrius, who was once engaged to Hermia's friend Helena, played by Melody. I know, it's very complicated. And Helena is still in love with Demetrius. So obviously, lots of things to untangle there. And then finally, the last group of characters, there are these craftsmen who are led by Bottom, played by Riley, and they are preparing to put on a play for the big wedding for Theseus and Hippolyta. So all of the characters kind of are intertwined in the end. So my first question for you all is, can you give a synopsis of each of your characters and give us a sense of how the character arc develops over the course of the ballet? And Harper, it's a little more complicated for you because you've got two characters. So would you like to start?
Yeah. So Helena, I would say, has a slightly less complicated arc. She's just head over heels for the officer, Demetrius, and he basically just sees through her. She's the only one in the ballet wearing these big, thick-rimmed glasses, and yeah, and she's just really wanting love and wanting to get his attention and just can't, and he's in love with someone else. And so there's a lot of comedic and quite, painful, which is fun, the juxtaposition there already of like rejection, but then we find it funny to see someone falling all over themselves at someone else. So she does a lot of that. When they enter the fairy world, this guy, Puck, has like a little magical flower and is trying to manipulate the lovers so that it'll have a better result, right? So that everyone can find love. But he keeps messing up. And so, at one point, I will say my favorite part of Helena is when both of the men are in love with her on the side. So she goes from being invisible to being, the one that everyone wants. I heard something interesting about that today from the ballet master that's setting it, and he said this is a moment where you see Helena go beyond the point of joy, and she gets a little nasty, because it's that moment of like, she's had all this hurt, and that is going to come out in some way. And so when Hermia comes back on and everyone loves her and no one's paying attention to Hermia, she just sort of shoos her away and says, it's my turn. And so, yeah, that's kind of her main arc. And then she does end up with Demetrius in the end and has love, and it's wonderful. But that's Helena.
That's great, thanks. And you kind of pointed out even another juxtaposition, like pleasure and pain, right? So for Helena, it's both simultaneously, and she says something in the play actually about that she's going to pursue Demetrius to the fairy forest, and she knows it's going to be painful, but it's also going to be pleasurable for her, right? Because she loves him so much. So that's great, thank you. Puck and Philostrate.
Yeah, so I think Puck is probably the more familiar of the characters from this ballet, and it's a real treat to dive into the role of Puck. But I actually start the ballet as Philostrate, who is master of the revels, and he is in charge of organizing everything for the wedding, and that's he's very detail-oriented, and to a point where he could be a little snarky, he can be a little bit pointed, and he really delights in the fact that Hippolyta might be nervous for her wedding, or that what pressure she might be feeling. And Philostrate has this relationship with Theseus, where he is his right-hand man. And all of a sudden, this relationship with Theseus is now in jeopardy because he's going to be marrying Hippolyta. So you have to, or I'm trying to find this balance of respecting Theseus as a leader and as a friend maybe, or a superior, but also that I'm just so jealous of the fact that this woman is now going to be replacing a potential friendship. And then once Hippolyta has her dream, I become Puck, who is not detail-oriented, and he's very mischievous and sort of like a jester to Oberon in some way, and he just delights in playing pranks on people, and is very quick-witted, and it's a lot of his actions, whether they're intentional or unintentional, that really drive a lot of the plot and a lot of the story. If Puck wasn't so obsessed with pulling pranks on people, I don't think that things would really necessarily happen the way they happen. He would take the orders that Oberon says, and he would recognize that he needs to put the flower on Demetrius and all would be fine, but he doesn't, and he mistakes Lysander for Demetrius, and he knows he makes a mistake, but he doesn't really care. And he finds it hysterical now that he has two men going after one woman. And yes, and then you finish the ballet as Philostrate. And I find that the character of Philostrate is something that I've been having a little bit of like challenge with, because I think that in the ballet, Neumeier really utilizes Puck and Philostrate as the narrator, and he has this relationship with the audience of maybe posing questions to them to ask what they're thinking, or do you think this is reality? Was this a dream? And challenging them to think about the situations that has taken place. And so it's a really complex role, and I'm on stage a lot. I'm on stage a lot, but it's really exciting, and we have such great guidance with Lloyd, who's here, and every day he says these little bits of knowledge that are I'm discovering as we go along. So I think that's the summarized version of these two characters that I get to play.
That's great, thank you. Lord, what fools these mortals be is Puck's line in the play, where he's just kind of exulting, in like causing all this confusion for the four young lovers. Yeah. I feel like Philostrate has this moment, if I'm remembering correctly, late in the ballet where he kind of like whips around and becomes Puck. Am I right? That there's...
Yeah, I mean, so I want you all to come see the ballet, and I don't want to give away.
We don't want to spoil too
I don't want
much,
to give
sorry.
away the ending, but yes, there's these moments of quick reaction to the rose. The rose is a really central figure throughout the ballet, whether we're in the human world or we're in fairy world. And I think these moments of he gets entranced with the flower, and he almost gets in his head and he starts to maybe fantasize or dream about what it could be. And then actually Melody's character, she jumps by as Helena, and you kind of snap out of it. And so it's this, is this real? Is this not? Am I Puck? And is this, it's just that juxtaposition that Shakespeare, I think, includes in the play, but that John really brilliantly conveys through movement and how he's staging and created these three worlds, so that once they start interacting, all of a sudden you're like, what's going on? So,
Great, thank you. And Bottom, finally.
Yes, so my character is Bottom, which is a donkey, but throughout most of the ballet, I'm actually a craftsman. In German, they call them the Handwerkers, which are basically just men who work with their hands. I've kind of decided for myself that I'm a carpenter, but we're a group of men who kind of would be the commoners in Athens at the time, and somehow we've been invited to put on a play at Hippolyta and Theseus' wedding, which is much to Philostrate's dislike. He really doesn't want us in the palace. He wants everything, done the way that he would like it. And so really with our first entrance, it's kind of us barging into the palace, somewhere we've never been, somewhere we really don't belong. And you can kind of sense the nervous energy building, and then it kind of just explodes, and we're kind of a big ball of energy. And in that first encounter, Hippolyta and Bottom have a bit of an interaction where maybe she's not falling in love with him, but kind of just admiring his simple-minded charm and just his kind nature. And I think that's something that John Neumeier has really kind of amped up in the ballet a little bit. We've added to that element since the last time we've done it here, which kind of then allows you to tie why in Hippolyta's dream she would end up with a donkey, because it's the same man that she saw and kind of had some interest in when she first met him. So, but throughout the ballet we have decided to put on a play, and the play is called, I'm blanking.
Pyramus and Thisbe.
Yeah, Pyramus and Thisbe. And so we are going throughout the forest and we're rehearsing the play, and I am in charge of getting this group of misfits together. So it's a bit of chaos. There is one of the dancers that dances on point, which is really exciting, but my character gets a little bit frustrated, like, come on guys, we really have to sell this. This is a big opportunity for us. We're doing a play at, the wedding of the king and queen. It's a really big deal, but we're really not fit for it. We're a hot mess, I would say. So throughout that process, we kind of collide with the fairy world a little bit, and Puck comes across us rehearsing in the forest and decides to turn my character into a donkey, which freaks everyone out because their boss just turned into a donkey. What is that? And then uses his flower, his rose, to cause Titania to fall in love with Bottom, and they have a bit of an interaction, which Oberon sees, and then chaos kind of ensues. And after that, I turn back into a human, kind of in a shocking way, and I'm reunited with the rest of the rustics, and we go on to put on our play at the wedding, which is a story similar to Romeo and Juliet, which if you're thinking about a play you would have at your wedding, maybe you wouldn't want to have a double suicide at your wedding. So that's kind of why Philostrate doesn't want us to perform it, but it ends up going over really well, and now we're all joining Broadway, is kind of the ending that
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, the Philostrate is very snobbish about it in the play, because he's reading like a list of options for the entertainment at the Duke and Duchess's wedding, and Pyramus and Thisbe is described as very tragical mirth. Everybody's like, okay. But you're absolutely right, it's a very Romeo and Juliet kind of story, and in fact, Shakespeare probably wrote Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer Night's Dream back to back. Not sure which order he wrote them in, but it's probable that he must have been really interested in that story, and so he kind of like inserted it as a play within a play in Midsummer Night's Dream. So thank you all for those excellent detailed synopses. So we've got 3 basic groups of characters in this ballet. We've got the Aristocrats, the Craftsmen, and the Fairies. And John Neumeier has decided to differentiate between these 3 groups in a number of key ways. And we've got 3 little kind of video clips from the ballet, just little tiny snippets so you can kind of see what these different groups look like, and also hear how they're distinct, because Neumeier has decided to kind of give each group their own musical score. And in part, this is to solve a logistical problem, because a lot of ballets of this play use the Felix Mendelssohn music, the 1840s Mendelssohn incidental music, but there's not enough of it for a full evening-length ballet. And so if you're going to use it, you have to figure out, well, what else am I going to use to pad out this score? So he uses the Mendelssohn for the kind of human aristocrat story, but then he also uses 2 other different scores. And so we're going to see each one, right? And the first one's the Fairies, I believe. And the Fairies are choreographed to the music of Gheorghi Ligeti. And so now you'll see a very contrasting clip of the human lovers. This does actually feature, I believe, Melody as Helena. And so this is choreographed to the Felix Mendelssohn incidental music. And finally, we have the Craftsmen, and they are choreographed to organ music. So there's not many ways you can kind of mix up any of those three groups, right? And so I think it's a brilliant device, not only to sort of help the audience kind of keep track of the characters and the story, but also to give a completely different look to each of the worlds and the different groups of characters. So the fairies, of course, look very different from the mortals. The beautiful Regency era costumes. You can see a couple of examples on the stage here. This is Theseus and Hippolyta's wedding outfits, I believe. So those are obviously very different from the Craftsmen, and which in turn are different from the fairies' costumes. So kind of with that in mind, I wanted to ask you all how the movement is different for each of the characters in terms of the choreography, and also how that might change depending on the situation that your characters find themselves in. Because I think all of your characters are both in the human world and in the fairy world, right?
So the lovers, we're part of the aristocratic world too. Our choreography is very classically based, as you can see. So we're doing classical vocabulary and pas de deux work. But for example, Helena, as you just saw, there's a lot more sort of acrobatic, I'm upside down a lot. There's a lot more physicality to create the comedy and the extremeness of the situation. So even though it's classical, her movement is extreme. In the fairy world, when we enter it, we don't necessarily do the same movement as the fairies that you saw, but I've heard John talk about the fairy world for him represents energy, and sort of like just like waves of energy, and that's his idea of this fairy realm. And so when we enter it, sometimes we're moving very slow motion, and I think that's to create an effect of like we've gone into a different realm or something like that. But yeah, our movement is pretty consistent and straightforward within our characters as far as Hermia and Helena. Hermia is more romantic, and her pas de deux work is very sweeping and, the swell of like being in love. And of course, they've got different stories about their movement.
As Philostrate, I think, yes, the aristocrat world, it's very classical, and he's very uptight and very, he has a bit of weight to his walk, and actually today in rehearsal, the ballet master was saying to never be too quick with how you react to things. and to be very stern and to be very direct. And then as Puck, his first entrance is his birth into the fairy world, and that was the first solo and piece from the work that I rehearsed with John when he was here. And he just kept saying slower, 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 slower. And it wasn't in a speed type of slow, it was taking the time to do and say everything and show everything. And he would say, instead of reaching farther, he would say, you're scoping all the fairies and you're moving the fog with your arm. Or instead of reaching lower down, he would say, whisper into the lake and say something to start your day. And so having those cues really changes the quality of Puck. But then as I think he starts to come to his senses and starts to experience the humans coming into his world, he can't help but start to emulate their movement, and he starts embodying the rustics and seeing how they move, and he becomes very quick. And I remember them saying that, like, he can fly, as a fairy, he can fly around the world in like 4 days or something like that. And so I do this really fast, energetic, electric step around the stage. And so Puck has, I feel like he's very unique in the sense that he sort of embodies all of the characters and how they move and how they think and how he himself has all of those qualities within them. So yeah, it's also very acrobatic. In my head, I'm sort of thinking that he likes to take situations and turn them on their head. And the first thing I do as Puck is I start in a headstand on my head. So I'm turning things on upside down, and a lot of the times I'm upside down.
Excellent, thank you.
So unlike both of them, none of my vocabulary is classical whatsoever. So again, kind of like the Craftsmen, our movement is most similar to pedestrian type movement. So a lot of our dancing is character dancing. I'm wearing boots. Kind of has like a tap feel to it, which has been fun to kind of break away from our normal a little bit. And as the ballet goes on, you'll see we're kind of creating the play that we are going to do at the wedding. That's our whole goal. And so as the boss, I've decided this is the choreography we're going to do, even though I have no credentials. So you'll see our dancing that we do in the play is kind of like bad dancing, but we think it's really good. Like, we are so invested. I watched, I read this book and they said, if you do this step, you're a good dancer, so we're going to do that step. And we're just trying our best. And so as I enter the fairy world, kind of like what Melody mentioned, suddenly everything is slow motion. The fairies are a ball of energy, but I'm not from this realm. So as I enter their world, I kind of think that I have a wave of energy come over me and it's too much for me to handle. So I'm moving very, very, very slow. And suddenly I have hooves that I didn't have before. And I move in a different way, and everything, it's kind of like, as I enter this new realm, everything I can see for the first time. Because the fairies are in our world constantly, but we can't see them. And so as I enter this realm, it's like an unreal realization that there's this whole other realm that exists around us, and my movement is really slow. And then suddenly doing this pas de deux with Titania, it is very physical, I'll say, which is very different from what you see with the Craftsmen. So there is a bit of an arc. We don't go full classical contemporary, but there is definitely quite a big arc in there throughout the evening.
Great, and so I'm also curious to hear what it's like to dance to the different musical scores, because you all heard a little snippet of the Ligeti, very different, of course, from the Mendelssohn and then the organ music. So that we know that the movement is different, but just what is it like for you all as dancers to have to deal with the three very different musical scores?
I think that the reason that Neumeier did that is what you mentioned earlier, is to transition us between three very distinct worlds. And I think it helps a lot. So I don't have a lot to say about it. I just think that it takes you from one place to another immediately and helps you to then interpret the way that his movement is changing, because the music is totally different, the feel is totally different. So it transports you. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that it's easier to count. There's an 8 count, which is easier to count, but then it's also easier for them to say you were late or you were early. Whereas the fairy world, you heard the music, it's just this constant noise. And how the fairy world starts is, I think, one of the most intriguing moments of the ballet. And it creates this sort of heartbeat that is consistent throughout the fairy world. And because there's no sound, we have to trust our internal rhythm as a dancer, but also the internal rhythm of every other dancer in the fairy world. And so, because there's no cues really to tell you to start running and do a leap across the stage, you just have to feel that, and that's what rehearsals are for. But yes, it's a really interesting sensation to feel this kind of pulsing energy around you with no real structure. But I also think that's what is so beautiful about it, and what I think John intended to create with this fairy world, and what they were sort of speaking about is that you just kind of get lost in it. So, yeah.
And then for me, dancing with the organ music is interesting because actually it comes from the organ player itself. We have music comes really from there. So you can kind of hear, one thing that I like watching the ballet is when we're in the wings, the music starts playing and you can hear it in the distance and you're kind of like, oh, here they come again. And it's interesting to me that our music is there, and then you have the Mendelssohn, which comes from the orchestra pit, and then the Ligeti, which is really all around. It's like a surround sound experience. And so I find it interesting to dance to because I don't think I've ever really danced to organ music like that before. And there are nice little nuances that I can play with the musicality a little bit. And you'll hear some familiar tunes as well in the play. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there's many tunes that I've heard before. So I feel it feels warm to me, the music. Like it's not, I don't have to change who I am to dance to this. It's just kind of like I can be a person and I connect with the music organically. So it's kind of a nice feeling.
And I don't think I realized that there's 3 different sources for the music in each case too. That's so neat. It's just like there's so many layers to what he's done. It's so cool.
I was just going to say that I'm on stage as Puck for all of their dances. And so as the music changes for their potages, I'm on stage, and then I'm on stage for when they're rehearsing the play with this machine of music. And it's been really interesting because at first I was like, I really want to make sure that I understand and listen to their music and get it. But then in reality, they come in and I'm supposed to be so shocked by them and see them for the first time. And so I'm actually trying to separate myself from the music and react naturally to what I hear, because the noises that come out of it are quite hysterical. And I'm supposed to be so intrigued by it and find such humor in it. And so how to convey that I'm hearing something for the first time, but I've been actually rehearsing it for a little bit, is also just an interesting type of dynamic.
And I think that's a great segue into my next question, which is about comedy. You all could see, I think, in each of those clips, even the fairy clip, that there's a lot of comedy in this ballet. And the play is, of course, one of Shakespeare's most beloved comedies. And there's a lot of physical comedy and all kinds of different sort of styles of comedy. And so I'm curious to hear you all talk about how this comes through in your character and the movement, and also what it's like to perform in a primarily comic ballet as opposed to, say, a tragic ballet like Romeo and Juliet, which you all just did earlier this year, right? So.
I think that I approach comedy the same way I approach tragedy. I think that comedy requires that you are fully committed to the motivation of why you're doing what you're doing. And it's not funny if you're trying to be funny, like ever, which is really hard because you know you're supposed to be funny. But yeah, I think that the more, and I know it's a question coming up, and I know I'm just gonna start now. Going back to this role, I feel like has helped me to dig in a little bit deeper to her motivation and the dynamics that are going on around her and between everyone. And it's just these tiny little moments and these little nuances. And I sat down with my partner that's playing Demetrius today, and I was like, well, why are you being so mean to me? And I'm having this conversation where I'm like, I think it should build, and I think that it's mostly like you don't see me, but I think the more that you have those conversations about all of these little interactions that are happening in the pas de deux every moment, that if you're fully committed to it and your heart is in it, it's built to be, it's the kind of funny that when you go to a comedy show and you're like, oh my God, that's so relatable. That's what's funny, is that it's human and we've all been there. And so for me, that's how I approach comedy, is that you have to be really, really committed and to understand why you're doing what you're doing and not try to be funny, just try to be like 100% there.
And you're motivated, as you said before, like Helena's motivated she's motivated by pain, by like frustrated love and all this desire that's coursing through her. So it's so neat to know that you all kind of sit down and have conversations about that, just apart from the movement, like understanding your characters and digging into that.
I mean, it's very similar to what Melody was saying, but I feel like it's sort of, have you ever had it where you like tell a joke, or you're telling a joke and then you accidentally say the punchline before, and then you're like, that was so embarrassing and awkward? And I think that that fails because you rush it. And I'm just finding, especially with Puck and I guess comedy and ballet, is that, and John has done it so beautifully and so clearly, that it's just in the steps, and that if you let the person or the scenario do what they need to do, and then you react to it without anticipating it, or you just have to tell yourself to react, then it's clear, and then it's funny, and then the joke or the punchline or the moment hits because you've all taken your time to do what needs to be done. And I'm just finding that with Puck, it's less about showing that something is funny and just being there to react to the steps or to the scene, and that holds more value than being like, look, or, because then it just becomes too frantic. And so I'm trying to think, I was Paris in Romeo and Juliet, and nothing I did as Paris was really funny, yeah, I just think taking your time, and it's in the steps, and sometimes just less is more for it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of things that they both just said. I think that the best thing that we can do is really commit fully to what we're doing and not think, okay, like I hope they get the joke. It's really, I'm 100% believing that, especially for the Craftsmen, like this play that we're doing, we've been rehearsing for 2 weeks, it is good. And of course, everything goes wrong, but we're fully intending for it to go right. So also as we are rehearsing our process, it's kind of, my character is the person who is, well, no, I told you to go on 3 and you went on 4. Like, these are the counts, come on. But when I make a mistake, it's perfectly intentional. And so I think one of the best things about that, especially with our group of guys, is that it's kind of natural. Like, we all have those moments as we're rehearsing where I'm like, okay, Harper, I told you 2 and you went on 3. Like, seriously, like, we have to do it again. So I think seeing some of the guys around, I'm like, okay, you messed up the counts. And then I'm like, is this method acting? Am I taking on this character fully? But also, one of the biggest things is timing. We rehearse, so much. So I know that this person's gonna fall on 5. But if I react on 5, that kills the joke. So I need to really let things happen in real time and really react to them. And I think one of the best things, especially about the Craftsmen, is, and Melody kind of mentioned it as well, like you'll relate to us on how human we are. And I think every time you hear, we kind of have a tune that comes before we're entering that you'll hear in the distance, like, oh God, here they come again. But I find, especially the first time I watched the ballet, you kind of land most with the Craftsmen as characters because it's something you can relate to as people. The interactions, the conflict that they're having with each other, you can relate, like, oh my God, my son did the same thing, or, you know, my mom drives me crazy and she does the same thing. Like, I feel like I can relate to a lot of those things. So it's bringing that human element into it and not thinking, okay, I'm doing a performance, I need to perform this way. It's really just taking interactions that I have as a human with these people and bringing it to the stage. So I think that's one of the things that helps it read the best for me.
And you all are clearly just approaching these characters the way that actors do, who are, you know, in a production of the play. I mean, of course, you have all the choreography to manage as well, but I feel like what you're saying is that you're doing both. You really are digging in to these characters and thinking about their motivations, and not just the choreography and the music. It's really, Stanton Welch has said repeatedly that, you know, this is an acting-based company, and that's something that you all are proud of and that you own, and I think you can really hear that in what you're saying. I guess with that in mind, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about what it's like to perform in a ballet that's inspired by a literary work. And you mentioned, you know, performing in Romeo and Juliet, but, you know, are there other Shakespeare-inspired ballets that you have experience with, and how that might compare to this one? Or maybe how, you know, a non-Shakespeare inspired ballet like Summer and Smoke, how that might compare to doing a Shakespeare inspired piece. I didn't phrase that all that well, but you get the gist. What is it like in dancing in a ballet inspired by a literary work?
One of the best things about it is that you have dialogue. So anytime, especially with Shakespeare, I'm not gonna lie, I think every Shakespeare ballet we've done, I've gotten the Shakespeare for Dummies little like book that's like a little bit edited and a little easier to get through. But finding your character and reading, like you were saying, the soliloquies and just the different moments that they have, and actually seeing what they had to say, that's such a privilege to have that. You know, a lot of times when we do abstract ballets or ballets that have a certain intent, or even sometimes story ballets, we don't have the privilege of having that. And so you can actually look at, you know, with that, I can see exactly what it was that Helena said to Demetrius. So, I mean, that's amazing. I also think that with literary works, I mean, especially with Shakespeare, often there are other productions that you can, you know, there's movies, there's other ballets, there's things that you can reference and just sort of get your own ideas going, and, oh, I like how she made that face, or, you know, so I think we can have a lot more to play off of when there's these existing literary works. And you can go see plays as well instead of just a ballet and see how other actors do it. So there's just a wealth of inspiration anytime it's a literary work, but especially with Shakespeare because it's so popular.
I feel like what I enjoy most about having text or dialogue already present for a role that I'm dancing is also the biggest challenge, just because I am someone who really likes to order, and I'm the type of dancer that loves to have the counts, and I love to be told, you know, this is what we're gonna do. And sometimes the challenge for me as a dancer is, how do I bring Harper into it? And so when I have such a clear guideline, as Shakespeare has created in his plays, it's easy to say, okay, well, that's how it's gonna be done. But what I'm trying to, you know, work on as a performer and as a dancer and as an artist is using that as just a tool to then go off and do something more with it. And so I hope that, I mean, it's really fun to know that this ballet has been done for 40 years and that there's been endless casts, and that it's not going to be done like the same every time. And so just having that mindset, I think I'm trying to challenge myself to use the text in the plays and the other media that is already out there, to say, okay, this is one version, but I'm also going to do it like mine. So it's sort of like the good and the bad, I guess, for me.
There's room for everybody's version in a way, like the play is so flexible. It's been done a million different ways and film and on the stage. It's like, it almost permits of endless variations. So, it's like your puck is there too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do like is obviously there's the text and there's movies and things that you can research, but what I like to do is kind of think about what my character is doing between the text. When, if there's a scene that's happening when my character's not involved, what is he doing off stage? Because I actually think that character development shows on stage. Like you can see in our first entrance that I'm entering the palace where I'm not supposed to be, and maybe I walked in the wrong room, and oh God, this is a closet. Okay, I'm not supposed to be here. Where am I going to go? And then we enter the room, and we're super nervous. I think all of that really shows on stage, that it's not just what you see, it's everything that you don't see as well. So I think just imagining what happens between the text and, all of that really shows on stage. And again, one of the things I do like about these characters is that they're human. Of course, it's a fictional story, but for me, playing a human character in this ballet as well as in Romeo and Juliet, I can relate to a lot of the things that they're feeling. So it's not like I have to try to become something that I'm not. I'm really just putting myself in someone else's shoes, and then I can really feel. It's not like I have to think, okay, they are sad, so I'm going to be sad. It's why are they sad? What are they feeling? What happened to them? I can kind of put that in my shoes and think, oh, you know what? I've had something similar to that. What did that feel like for me? And then that's when it really reads best, I think, is when it's something that personal that's truly kind of happened to you.
Thank you so much. I think we are going to now transition to questions from the audience. If anybody has questions.
Harper, my question is for you. Sorry, did you scare you? My question is for you. Each of these others are developing one character. And you are developing three completely different characters. How hard is that for you to instantly be able to transition and leave this pup here and go into this one and move between those three? That has to be very, very, your mind has to be able to work unbelievably to be able to transition.
The questions about how Harper moves between his several different characters.
So I've been sort of treating it like a mixed rep program, where my first ballet is Philostrate, my second ballet is Puck, and my third ballet is Philostrate at the end. I think what I have great guidance and tools from John, because the movement is so different, and so committing to the movement quality fully really allows for them to be separate. And the intention of thinking about, okay, I see something, but how would Puck see it? Or, Philostrate might be very direct and he might scold one of the seamstresses, but Puck, how he maybe turns his head or leans in curiously to what they're doing. So those little mannerisms are what I try to focus on to create a well-rounded character. Just thinking about how would this creature, this fairy, react, and then how would this human react, is really how I start. But it really comes down to the movement, in that Philostrate isn't being swung around upside down, doing handstands, and Puck is. And so it is challenging, but it really is given through the movement. So I just am trying to commit to it fully.
Well, having watched you on the stage for a number of years, you are one of our favorites to watch because you what you're trying to do. Appreciate it.
So I have a wish list. What is your wish list? Which character you'd like to perform that haven't performed yet?
Asking about which character would they like to perform?
Ballet, yes.
In any ballet or just in this one?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, any ballet.
I mean, seeing all of Oberon's material, I think I've got my eyes on that for next time this comes around, not gonna lie.
In the spirit of Shakespeare and Houston Ballet, I'd love to do Romeo. Would be a big dream.
There's a ballet that we don't have in our rep yet called Lady of the Camellias that I love and would love to dance one day. So that's a dream.
And that's a Neumeier ballet, right? Am I right about that? Okay.
So when, I guess maybe in February and the next year's season is announced, do we ever start thinking like, gee, I hope I can get to play this, get to be this character in this particular ballet that we're going to do next season? And then you just start seeing your positive karma to whoever it is that makes up the decision, which is Stan. And, pick me. Do you ever do that, or do you feel that way, or?
100%. I think that especially when there's a ballet that I'm not familiar with, I'll look on, we have an archive of videos, I'll look on there and kind of see, okay, I've always heard of this ballet, what characters are interesting, and kind of I try to keep it a little realistic in the ballpark, like, okay, this is probably what I'm gonna do, this is something maybe a step above that I hope I can do. I've got my eyes on some stuff for Cinderella already that I would love to do, but I try to be open because it's like that's what I would love to do, but there's so many great roles, especially in Stanton's work and in John's work. The ballet is so full that really just being a part of it is great.
So when you get the role that you want, do you do your little happy dance?
At home, yeah. Not in front of the casting board, though.
To be honest, when the casting came up for Midsummer, this is the second time I've done it. When we first did it, I was the painter, I was a wedding guest, I was one of the fairies in the fairy world. And I believe it was 2015, 2014 we first did it. And I remember interacting with Puck just because I was on stage with him, but I never thought of myself as doing the role. And these past few seasons, I've really been on my partnering journey. I've been doing a lot of partnering and lifting, and which has been really exciting. And Puck does no partnering, and he is partnered. You'll see Oberon have to lift me up. Poor Chase O'Connell. I'm trying to be good for him, but and so when this came up, it was a real sort of. I was a little bit surprised, but I think that Stanton knows his dancers, and I was really excited for the challenge, because when I watched it, there were intimidating moments, and there are intimidating moments. And I think that having nerves and having a little bit of anxiety before a role means you care about it and that you want it to go well. And so I wasn't really expecting this as far as doing it, and I think that I'm gonna try and keep that mentality of just not expecting a little bit and being trusting the process, and then whatever's given to me, do it 110%.
I think just because I don't know, I'll say something a little bit different. We do a lot of new creations in this company. We get to do a lot of new work. And it's not always narrative, but sometimes it is. Last season we did Summer and Smoke with Kathy Marston. Right now, Annabelle Lopez Ochoa is creating Delmira, which is also a narrative about a real life story of an Argentinian poet. And so I think for me, when they announce the season and we've got new works coming in, that's also very exciting. And sort of, instead of putting your hat on like, oh, I want to do that role, there's definitely that too, but it's also really exciting to not know what it's going to be and just wonder how it's going to go. And I get very excited about that.
What is the process of how, I mean, are you in a room all together, or is it up on a piece of paper and you look at the wall? How do you find out what role you get? Because it must be quite a moment.
It's a piece of paper on the wall. And we all are like trying to push people aside to see who's doing what. Yeah.
I think the best part about it is that usually, like at the end of last season, John Neumeier came and watched class, and then we're like, okay, I guess today's the day. We got to show them what we got. And that happens a lot when we have a new choreographer come in. They'll watch class, they'll sit with the staff. Stanton and the staff will kind of say, okay, this dancer does these type of roles usually. They've done this work. They'll send them videos. So that's usually our time where we're like, okay, it's game time. Like, I've got to show them what I got if I want to get this role. So, and then we get the piece of paper.
So it's all in technique class? Like it's in class that they observe you? It's not like an audition type thing or a scenario?
I mean, we kind of do both. Sometimes, like, especially if it's a new creation, we'll take class. They'll kind of see, okay, there's, you know, I want to work with this group of people and kind of narrow it down. I know, especially with Kathy Marston last year, we started with like 10 people for a role, and then she just kind of worked with us and then cut it down a little bit. I mean, but it doesn't feel like that. It's not like, okay, we're making cuts. It's just kind of, we're all working. We want to make, you know, art. It's kind of exciting when you're like, okay, I'm in this room with these people and we're working on something. We're going to try something new, and then it evolves, and then they kind of just decide, okay, you know what, this person, I think they fit the role, and that's kind of how it is. But sometimes there is sort of an audition process.
They were asking what the audition process was like, if people just come in to watch a technique class, if there's material given, and so Riley was just saying it's varied, kind of. Yeah.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. I just want to thank you all for being such great communicators. You all communicate in every way, not just with your dancing, but by coming here and talking to us and let us see a little bit of the inner of you and how you prepare, which I think is phenomenally wonderful. Thank you for making Houston Ballet so great.
They are all wonderful communicators. I agree. I'm sorry, yes. She was saying that it was not a question, it was a comment, just thanking them for being amazing artists and sharing all of this about themselves. So, you said it better than I just did. Yes, in the back.
Do you have a favorite moment in this ballet, whether it's for your character or another character?
Favorite moment in the ballet for your character or another character?
I have a tiny little moment that happens with when you're Philostrate. So Helena is Philostrate's favorite. He has like a little affinity for her and just feels like a soft spot for her. And there's a moment where she's trying to impress Demetrius, and so she like grabs this bouquet of flowers and like gets all up in his face, and he walks past her again. And she goes and gets the wedding bouquet, and a girl comes in and snatches it from her, and the dialogue is supposed to be kind of like, you'll never get married, right? It's kind of mean. And he gets mad, and he takes the bouquet from the girl and like gently gives it back to Helena, and I'm like, thanks. I really like that moment.
I mean, for me so far, I think I'll really know when we perform, because there's kind of moments, especially with jokes, like something that lands really well, I know it's going to feel good. But so far it's been the play that we do at the wedding, just kind of starting that, embodying a character that's completely ridiculous is my favorite moment. And the chaos that ensues throughout all of it, I just love it.
I'm going to try and answer this without sounding so selfish. But one of the last, in the last rehearsal we had when John was here, before he left, he spoke about how he felt that this ballet and his ballet should be sort of ever evolving, and that he's watched it from the audience now so many times that with each time it comes back or each time a company does it, he makes little changes. And so if something isn't clear, he doesn't just leave that, he fixes it. And he was saying that the start of Fairy World is not ideal for what he wanted. And so he re-choreographed it. And he changed it all, and how it starts, I don't want to give too much away, but it is very central to Puck. And it sort of is, I mean, I love a dramatic moment, you know, and it reveals Puck in this really cool way that hasn't been ever done before. And that feels very special for us as a company, because yes, it's been done so many times. Yes, it's this incredible classical ballet, but it almost feels now like a premiere in itself, that it's like our own Houston version. And there are other moments that have changed, like even the video that they showed of the Fairy World, that whole scene is now different and will be different when you see it on stage. And so I feel like a sort of gratefulness that John entrusts us with saying, I want to do this for you. And you are all capable of taking my vision and making this ballet better. So I think that, I guess that moment shows that, but all the moments that have made A Midsummer Night's Dream 2023, I think is probably my favorite moments.
And it's something that is just so special about ballet, which is that it doesn't live in like an archive or in a book. It's through the bodies of the dancers. I mean, that is what it is, and it's a living, evolving art form. So that's so great. I think we are out of time, so thank you all so much for sharing.